This is Roleplaying Public Radio. I'm Russ Payton, and with me is Tom Church and Mr. Adam Scott Glancy for RPPR episode 95, Historical Histronics. And so this special
His voice does that every time.
Yes.
That line.
And so with this episode, we're going on Skype to bring in Mr. Scott Glancy to talk about researching into for games, especially historical games. And so, because who better to talk to than the master himself of historical?
Clearly, you couldn't get Ken Hite, so I will be more than happy to fill it in.
I'm trying to help, and you just throw that away.
You are the one.
If I may quote, yeah. I'm going to quote Dirty Harry. A man's got to know his limitations, and I swing a good second banana to Ken Hite. That man's
it's really unfair comparing yourself to Kenneth Hite. I mean,
well, yeah, you're exactly. Yeah, that's.
Well, let's be clear.
We are but mortals.
You always know if you fired 6 shots or only 5.
Yeah. So first off, though, before we get into that, we have some news. First off, we have a new design and a new banner for the RPPR Actual Play podcast website. Our banner was created by none other than the webcomic artist extraordinaire Casey Green, and it shows and I've reorganized things a little bit. The characters, just for the record, are Quoth from left to right, Quoth from No Evil, Ghost Robot from the Heroes of New Arcadia, then Bartleby from No Evil, and then in the middle we have a little portal to the fantasy realm with the one at the Gripply, and then next we have Pontifex from the New World campaign, Caleb's, of course, Scary Marionette Man from Bryson Springs, and then the RPPR Dragon. So that's for the record. I've also created a web page on the RPPR site, or AP site, called the Campaign Index, which lists all of our campaign pages, so you can just go there and click and then get a link to all the No Evil episodes or whatever you want. So yay, I finally redesigned the website. It only took 3 years. So
it's quite fetching.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. It's very nice, Ross. It's very nice.
So I will be using that until the end of time, because it took forever, and it's still not 100% perfect. It's not totally plain nice with the podcast banner or plug-in, because the play things are weirdly configured. Yeah. Anyways,
we'll change it again after the next evolutionary epoch.
Or Mayan age. So next up we have.
Yeah, isn't there a some sort of Viking calendar that's about to run out that everyone's going to pull their hair about for 5 minutes? Because the Viking.
If there is, that's awesome. I want to learn.
You want to know immediately if there's Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe this one will be the one.
Yeah.
Well, we can only hope, because I've got an enormous amount of credit card debt, and there's nothing.
We're Americans. Woo.
And if the world ends and you still owe money on your credit card, you win.
Except student loans, then those don't ever go away. So
no, they do not. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Outside of the embrace of sweet death. So next we have some new content for the Base Raiders website. By the time this episode is posted, there will be a character creation.
I said Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. I must correct myself. It's Sally Mae. It's all these. I don't know who all these Mays are, but they clearly have all our debt.
I think they're in-laws of Big Brother. I mean,
yeah,
that's
like cousins or
one
something.
Big old family panopticon dystopian. So new content for the Base Raiders website, character creation survival guide, new fiction, new strange skills. There's going to be a form fillable character sheet, thanks to I think username Rusty Bucket on the RPPR forums, who created that, and so lots of great stuff. Also, Task Force Darknet, the bonus adventure that certain Kickstarter backers will get, is in playtesting. We'll be playtesting it soon with the RPPR group, and that's going to go out. It includes photo handouts as part of it, and Aaron was kind enough to pose as the super soldier drug dealer. So that was under FBI surveillance for this adventure. So you can look forward to that.
The friendliest looking drug dealer ever.
Well, that's kind of, you don't want like the big scary guy to be the drug dealer, because that's kind of obvious. You want to hide.
First of all, it chases off the customers.
Yeah, exactly.
a lot of these tweakers are jumpy, and you want them to feel welcome while they give you their hard stolen money.
And to be honest, who's going to find the bases first? It's not going to be the professional criminals. It's going to be the nerds who know all the trivia about the superheroes and know how to, they're the ones who are going to find the bases first, and they'll start selling the drugs so they can,
And where the old school drug dealers are just lamenting, like, man, remember the way things used to be?
Murder and criminal cartels. Oh man, that was great. So anyway, so that's it for RPPR. Scott, what's going on with Pagan?
Oh God, Pagan is completely buried in Delta Green right now. As the only Legionnaire surviving at Fort Zinderhoof, I have all the hats, and right now the only hat I can wear is Write More Delta Green. So if Shane Ivey is listening to this, please be aware that I have been using National Novel Writing Month in an attempt to crank out about 60,000 words of new Delta Green material. It's more like 35,000 words, but I'll take what I can get. This last weekend is the big final push. I'm hoping to get a couple things back to Shane and get it all done by the end of December. Is my goal, but the result is that everything else I am an absolute shit at trying to multitask. So I am not getting anything else done except write Delta Green, and then followed up by some writing of Delta Green. So.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean,
you are eating food, I hope, right?
My wife brings in changes my catheter and changes my feeding tube, and because she loves me.
Spouses are great.
Yeah, and so changes my bag, and then I'm good to go. So yeah, that's how that's working out. Food. Oh no. Well, I shouldn't totally poo-poo food. This week was we went and had Thanksgiving combination Thanksgiving Hanukkah with some of the guys from Harebrained Schemes, the guys who made the new Shadowrun game,
and Golem Arcana.
And working on Golem Arcana. Yeah, and we're regaled by Mr. Mitchell Gittleman with tales of how Herschel saved Hanukkah. This is a fabulous book about this rabbi named Herschel who saves Hanukkah from goblins. I think perhaps what they meant were goyim, but or Cossacks, but nevertheless he saves Hanukkah in a very traditionally raven coyote spirit, Anansi's trickster sort of way that you expect in folklore and folktales. Yeah, there was food. There was potato latkes until you wanted to explode. It was nice. Pretty damn good.
Is turkey kosher? I never.
They're an incredibly not kosher family. They were not worried about about whether they mixed their cheese and meat in the same product. Although I can't think of any immediate violations of Abrahamic law that took place during the meal. But I think the turkey might pass as kosher. I think as foul.
To be honest, yeah, my understanding of kosher law is no pork, no shellfish. That's about it. So
there's something about camels too.
Yeah, well.
There's this weird rule, like, again, the feet are funny, so you can't eat it. Really?
That's true. Yeah, there's something like that.
Funny feet.
Well, back when trichinosis or whatever that disease that pig meat has. Yeah, that was probably a good idea. But anyway, we digress, which is going to be pretty much this episode.
Yes.
So,
Scott and Ken Haidt, he'd stay on topic.
Yeah, that's true. He would, but again, we are but mortal men. The inspiration for this episode came from the comments of the latest Glancy actual play, The Iron Devil, where people were clamoring for us and Scott to talk about history. So I thought, so I mentioned this to Scott, and I mentioned Cold Dead Hand, since we had play tested that for the Unspeakable Oath, and you can listen to that play test on the Unspeakable website. And you mentioned that you did a lot of research for that, including going to a missile silo. So talk us through like where the idea for this scenario came from and like what kind of research you did for that, because I'm dying to know.
Well, okay. The thing that the first thing I suppose that happened was there was this thing called the Cold War, which I was banking on was going to provide me employment for the rest of my life, because it had been around, since before I was born. Clearly, it's not going to slow down. I mean, Red Dawn had just come out, so clearly this Cold War thing was still going to be going strong. And I was in college and graduate school, and I had gotten a master's degree in Latin American studies. So in history was my base degree. So I was already on my way in that department. And I thought I was going to go get a bean counter job at the Central Intelligence Agency. I actually, filled out the forms and went and took their entry exam, which was charmingly given on the weekend at a closed Jesuit high school. For those of you who enjoy conspiracy theory, the entrance exam, it was sort of like the Foreign Service Officer test for the State Department, but they gave it at a Jesuit high school. And then, there was the recruiters came through college and sent in this giant form where you had to list every neighbor you've ever had, and
background check.
And eventually, it got around. It was. They got around to somewhere in, I'm trying to think, it was like the winter of 1990. And, they're like, okay, I get this phone call and they're like, we want you to come to Reston, Virginia to an unmarked building. We're going to send you an airplane ticket. We're going to put you up at a hotel and you're going to get some interviews, and don't tell anyone you're going. And they literally, had a guy standing there with a sign that says, Ace Tomato Company or something, that, so it doesn't say Central Intelligence Agency. A bunch of people got off the plane, went to the shuttle. We were all driven to this one hotel, all checked in by a guy who didn't introduce himself. And then boom, next morning they pick us up and take us, and we all have our interviews. And I'm thinking, this is going to be great. This is going to be the best thing ever. And I, got to see the interior of the CIA headquarters and the wall with all the stars, and walked around backstage a little bit, escorted by, some folks. And I thought, this is going to work out great. I mean, they paid for my airplane ticket, to come up here. This is fabulous. They paid for my hotel. And then, I guess it was like spring or something, because then the summer rolls around. They're like, okay, we'll let you know about whether we're going to bring you back for a polygraph and a second set of interviews. And I'm like, great. And the summer rolls around, and suddenly, out of the blue, it's August of 1991, and the coup happens in Moscow. And I'm sitting there watching, Soviet communism unravel like a cheap sweater. And I'm thinking, oh, God, please go, Stalinist coup. Come on, gun down fire on the White House, gun down Boris Yeltsin. For Christ's sake, she's standing on top of a tank. You telling me you can't hit him with a sniper shot from the Kremlin wall? Come on, he's right there. Okay, he's wobbling a little because he's drunk, but you can still take the shot. Take the shot, please. And then boom, it just all falls apart like it's a week. And every republic's running for the door. Everybody's declared their independence from the Soviet Union, including Russia. Right? Russia has bailed out the Soviet Union. And I'm like, okay, this is it's over, and it just all falls apart within a couple of weeks.
And I trusted you, Soviet Union.
I trusted you. And so, suddenly I get this call like in late August after the coup, and they're like, "Hey, we're ready here at the CIA for you to come back for your next set of interviews." I'm like, "Great, that's fabulous!" And it's like, "Of course, we're not playing for the airplane ticket or the hotel, but if you'd like to come up," and I'm like, "Oh God." I can see how this is going.
Yeah.
They're already having the plan. Well, history's over. We can all put our shoes up on our desk and, relax.
It's all McDonald's and Cokes from here on out.
Yeah, exactly. God bless America.
Hardcore assassin just, oh, man. Jig is up.
Yes. No. He just moves into the private sector.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Presuming that, McDonald's and Arby's will be murdering each other's executives over the next decade.
Shadowrun 20.
Sadly, we did not go all Cyberpunk 2020 or Shadowrun. But I'm like, I was so attached to the idea. I still paid for the ticket. I still went up there and I still got polygraphed. But I knew how it was going to turn out. Another few months go by and I get the letter and it says, thanks, but no thanks. And of course, it was because, one of the major reasons is dummy that I am. My specialty was Latin American studies, which, looked like it was the new front line of the Cold War with the Sendero Luminoso down in Peru and the Sandinistas and the Contras going strong all through the 80s.
Right.
And, Venezuela starting to head that direction because Chavez is starting. I think he tries a coup early in the 90s before he finally gets himself voted into office. But, I'm thinking that but the problem with Latin America is that the U.S. government prefers to ignore that it exists unless there's commies. I mean, America's never showed any interest in Latin America unless somebody else shows some interest in Latin America. And then we get all Monroe Doctrine-y about the whole thing. So if I had studied Arabic or maybe Russian studies and knew some Russian so that there can be that whole game of that whole, three-card Monte with the nukes that was going on in the 90s as the Soviets are selling off their war machine to anyone who can meet the price. Maybe I could have gotten the job, but Latin American studies, yeah, that's a good one, kid. So so the coup already annoyed me. The 1991 coup had already annoyed the hell out of me and ruined my employment plans. And so I was already sort of very interested in that. I don't remember when I first heard of the Dead Hand, but I'm fairly certain that the idea for the scenario turned up before I'd heard Dead Hand, that in the earliest iterations of it, and it's been around a long time. I play tested this back in '99, or I think it was, here at Pagan, and and revamped it a couple times since then. But I believe the original idea was it was going to be a flat out just nuclear missile silo,
right?
Rather than the perimeter thing. It wasn't until I heard about perimeter, as the Soviets are hemorrhaging all their old secrets,
right.
That I got the idea that, oh wow, we can do more than just send up one missile, or one wing of missiles. But I'd started to hear things like. That the Soviets didn't trust their missile crews to turn the key. They had a backup system where they could launch the missiles in the silos from Strategic Rocket Command headquarters. They could be in the office or the bunker under Yamanato Mountain, which is the big, crazy Soviet era underground city in the Urals that is either still being built or maybe being added on or upgraded or something, or maybe it's just being allowed to fall into ruin like so much of the ex-Soviet materials. But
Apocalypse Hilton.
Yeah, they had a system for launching the missiles whether the crews wanted to or not. So that idea meant that I thought, well, that means you wouldn't have to have everybody in every silo turn the key. You could launch a missile wing or could launch a missile from someplace else. You wouldn't have to be in the silo to do it. So that sort of got me thinking. Okay, then it's possible to take over like a central headquarters or a central command position and launch the wing. Eventually, got around to finding out about Dead Hand, and Dead Hand just seemed so much creepier. Than regular missile silo. I remember, if you can believe this, there was an episode of The Greatest American Hero with William Catt and Robert Culp, and there's one episode where The problem is that the American version of Dead Hand has been activated, and they referred to it as the spoiled sport system, which was the idea being that there's a big nuclear exchange and the computer system would automatically hold back some percentage, like 5% of the missiles, randomly in their silos, would not fire them, and hold on to them for 3 days and hit the Soviets again while they're digging out of the rubble. I think that was the direct quote from Robert Culp. Was like, they're digging out of the rubble. Boom! Here's your second dose of nukes. And I thought, well, that's really creepy. And to find out that, oh my God, this isn't a fake system. That this was something that people had actually built. And there's also some debate about whether Dead Hand exists. I mean, I've read things where certain Soviet officials says that it exists, certain Soviet officials said that it exists, but it's not automated. Other Soviet officials have said that, it requires a crew to launch the missiles. There's no countdown. No, it never really existed. So there's a lot of back and forth about whether the system was ever deployed, whether it was ever turned on. But it made a good the lack of human intervention, the Dr. Strangelove aspect.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of a lot.
Really appealed.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I just realized not everyone who's listening to this may have already read the scenario. So, yeah. So the concept of the scenario is the players are all Soviet commandos who Spetsnaz, I believe, right?
Yep.
Or yeah.
Yep.
And what they were told a radar station is gone dark, during a snowstorm, and they need to go in there and reestablish contact. What they are not told, of course, is that it is a Dead Hand nuclear missile silo, and that if it is not contact is not reestablished within a certain timeline, it's going to launch nukes. This is, of course, happening during the coup. In the 1991 coup. So
perfectly no chaos at all.
Yeah. The other thing I remember hearing about the coup, reading about later, was there was this thing where the commander of the Strategic Rocket Forces, the commander of the Soviet Red Banner Navy, and the Soviet Air Force all had a sit-down during the coup. I mean, the defense minister, Dmitry Yazov, was in on the coup, and so was Khrushchev, the KGB guy, and various other guys. But the guys who actually were in charge of the forces that had nukes sat down and said, we're not giving command authorization to launch anything until we know who's in charge. We're going to set this one out. We're not going to throw our weight behind one side or another. And we're going to wait till something like constitutional authority emerges. But they're not going to give the codes or launch authorization to the the State Committee for the State of Emergency. I think it's literally that's what the terrible Soviet name for the coup was called, the coup group, the junta. So I like the idea that there was a period of time where, who was in charge of the nukes was kind of unsure. Mm-hmm. You had 3 days where, it was kind of up in the air.
Huh. Who's on first with nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
So, anyways, I changed it a little bit. I decided that since the radar installation was going to be easily detected as not a radar installation, and I wanted to in the final published version, you guys play tested an earlier version where the Soviets lie to their men a lot, and I just have them lie to the men a bunch as opposed to a lot, where you're told it's a missile silo, that it's absolutely a missile silo, and you've got to go in and stop the missile silo. And so there's this added, incentive that, we are talking about a silo full of missiles, and nobody wants to see those 3 missiles launched. But when you get down there, it's like, oh, wait, it's not going to just launch 3 missiles. It's going to launch hundreds of missiles. But they don't want to tell you. They don't want to tell you the scale of the disaster because they're afraid you'll freeze up or panic or something, or won't do your jobs. So, of course, typical, the Soviets downplay the danger. Like, go ahead, pick up that rubble. It's totally not radioactive. Put it in the pile with the other rubble. So, you go in as commandos, and the facility has been taken over by cultists of Athakwa, because, it's up north and it's cold. And I've always enjoyed it when the cultists don't really know what they're doing either. That this idea that, I've read me into the Necronomicon, or I've gotten some dreams from Cthulhu, and now I have the inside track on everything, and now all of us cultists will now operate, together like a well-oiled machine.
Nope.
Nope. I like it when they're just as screwed up and stupid as as everybody else, and these guys are trying to make a nuclear winter for Ithaqua because they think Ithaqua will like that. They think that Ithaqua wants everything to be cold, and that's not how Ithaqua works at all. It doesn't actually. It's not going to help Ithaqua a lot. I mean, sure, if you have a nuclear war, one of the places that's going to get nuked the least is everything in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
I mean, northern Siberia, Canada, Greenland, Spitsbergen, places like that won't get pounded like everything around the equator, everything around the temperate zones of Europe and America. So maybe that will push refugees into the north, which will put them under the geographic influence of Ithaqua, but he could give a crap about what the temperature is. So they're trying to appease Ithaqua by increasing the size of his domain, which will not actually work. They've done, and the other thing that I don't remember where I got the idea that the cultists would be camp guards in a Soviet gulag, who, having been marooned in this gulag for decades.
Yeah, I like that concept because spoiler alert, in the scenario it shows that they were there to build a silo, and the Soviet security state, being what it was like, well, how do we keep these guys from leaking info to the West about this missile silo? I know, we'll just keep them there forever. And like, is that? I mean, I'm not enough of an expert to know. Is that like something that happened on a regular basis? Did that happen at all?
Well, there's certainly a thing where when it came to the gulag system, if you were a guard in a gulag, in the Chemkatka or the Chotski Peninsula, or up north of Perm or someplace like that, you weren't there because you were everybody's favorite, Chekist. You were there because you were unpopular in some way. The guards were often as stuck in these places as the prisoners were, and weren't getting out. These were not plum assignments,
So they were exiled.
Yeah, they were. There's a lot of. If you fell out of favor, yes, your new job major is you get to be, the commandant of camp, 1407. Congratulations on your new command. We will never be seeing you again. So that idea, I mean, I knew that was true, that happened. There are a number of other creepy stories that come out of the Soviet Union. Viktor Suvorov, who's this guy who wrote about being in the Spetsnaz and being in the GRU. A lot of his stuff has to be taken with a grain of salt, but he told stories in his book, Inside the Aquarium, that when he was going through Spetsnaz training, the Spetsnaz facility for training was next to a gulag in the Ukraine. And the gulag was a place where they were mining this kind of blue cobalt clay that had a high uranium content in it. And, literally the gulag prisoners are shoveling radioactive clay with shovels and sneakers. I mean, there's no protection. It was a place that they set people who were, you've been sentenced to 10 years, comrade, but that's only because we didn't want to publicly sentence you to death. You'll just go to the gulag, and then your death will be reported as typhus or industrial accident or whatever. And because of this, the place was known to have periodic prisoner riots because people, they knew it was a death sentence. And so at some point, people would just go, fuck it, I'm irradiated, my teeth are falling out, let's try and kill a guard. So there were periodic prisoner riots, and the reason that they had built the Spetsnaz training facility next to it was so they would always have an opportunity for live fire exercises.
Wow.
That they just predicted that since there's going to be riots, we might as well have guys there, get them used to shooting people. Yeah, exactly. So there's that kind of creepy Soviet bullshit. So, the idea that they took the construction crew who built the gulag and just left them up north so they could never come home. Yeah. You all got the Order of Lenin, so there's that. You got that going for you. So that wasn't impossible. That doesn't seem like a huge stretch to me, considering some of the other nasty that has happened over the years. But it evolved. I guess you're saying, where did it evolve from? I mean,
so you kind of got the idea. It just came from multiple sources and just kind of just stalls process in your head, basically.
Yeah, and it's Stephen King made this joke about he's got a great his brain is like a sewer pipe with a grate in it, and certain things catch in his grate that maybe don't catch in other people's, and that's a lot of how some of these scenarios evolve and are created. Is that something catches in my grate and I go, that would be good somewhere. Yeah. I wish I could find a place for it, and eventually enough gunk builds up that it starts to form into something like a notion and an idea, and it really does have kind of a sedimentary like process where stuff builds up in layers and layers until suddenly I can get a moment where I can see how this is going to actually be a scenario.
I got you. So once you had the idea, though, what kind of research did you? I mean, you've already mentioned you basically just write up books, like general books on the topics, and you're already broadly familiar with the subject matter. But like, what kind of specific research did you do for the scenario?
At the time when I was originally planning it, it was probably before I got to Pagan. It was probably 1995. Because again, the chaos of the coup had just happened in 91, and I really liked the idea that there was a moment where anything was possible. Those moments don't really happen very often in history, where you literally have all no holds barred, anything could happen. All I needed to do was find a place on Earth where that anything could happen, but no one would necessarily notice it. And Siberia being a good choice for that, northern Siberia. The internet was up and running, and very early on, I found some websites about missile silos. There were some people who'd done this sort of urban explorer spelunking thing where they had cracked open some Titan silos and taken an enormous number of pictures of the insides of these Titan silos. And so that immediately got me thinking, because the Titans were liquid rockets. They were old. They were like Cuban Missile Crisis vintage and decommissioned soon afterwards. But they're massive and huge and filled with tunnels and stuff and big steel doors. And, that sort of got me going as far as, what should the facility look like? What should the base look like? It wasn't until a few years ago that my friend Jared Wallace realized that there was a Titan missile silo in eastern Washington near a town called Odessa, go figure, that was owned by a guy who would give tours of it. And it was actually pretty expensive. It was like, I want to say it was $200. And it was supposed to be like for 3 hours or something, but he kept us underground for about 6. He let us run around and do all kinds of stuff. And getting down actually into the silo, we took a pilgrimage out there because Mr. Wallace is into all things apocalyptic. In fact, the two of us do a podcast, well, not a podcast, but a video blog that you can see on YouTube that's all about all topics post-apocalyptic, called Podcast at Ground Zero.
Podcasting Ground Zero. Yeah, I know I've seen you've posted that on Facebook. I meant to keep watching it, but again, I'm behind on every podcast.
Hopefully this Monday we're going to do another episode, the first of what I hope will be many episodes about Fallout. We've finally gotten around like 10, 12 episodes in. We finally got around to talking about Fallout. But anyways, the silo is pretty impressive. It's really sort of, I don't know, shocking in its size. It's like a battleship that they have buried in the earth. or like an ancient, like a pyramid or something. The scale is on the scale of the things built by the ancients, particularly the domes that the engineering and command sections are built into. So all the material about the actual construction of the facility I got by going on that tour. I didn't know. I knew that there were springs, right? I mean, I'd known that since studying about NORAD Mountain, Crystal Palace, Cheyenne Mountain facility, that they had all these buildings in a big, artificial cave supported on springs so that the shock wave of a near miss wouldn't, bounce them off the walls. What I didn't realize is that everything in these silos were attached to springs, including the launch gantries. That you had a big concrete tube with a launch gantry for the missile, and that gantry is supported by gigantic springs attached to the walls. So even the whole launch facility can rattle around inside the concrete silo and still survive and be able to be launched for a counterstrike, depending on how close the near miss is. So the physical features of the interior of the silo, I wouldn't have gotten that unless I'd actually gone in and stomped around in the place, and that stuff was really fascinating.
Of course, this is the American missile silo, so I assume that it was just a little too expensive to try and find a Russian missile silo to go.
Well, there's two problems with Russian missile silos, I would think. One, I'd have to go to Russia. Again, and that was the thing. I'd actually been in Russia in '89, 2 years before the coup. I'd actually been there when it was still the Soviet Union. I went there for a class on Soviet studies, and we were in Central Asia in places like Tashkent and Samarkand and Khiva and all these cities that used to be on the Silk Road that the Soviets have overrun. The most amusing thing about that trip was when we were down in Central Asia, down near the Afghan border. It was '89. The Soviets were pulling out of Afghanistan. And so there were two effects of this. One, our tour bus couldn't drive on any of the main highways because it was clogged with tanks. And they didn't want the American spies / tourists looking at the tanks. The other thing was they wouldn't let us fly during the daytime hours. Any foreigners had to take nighttime flights, so you couldn't look down and see that the roads were clogged with Soviet tanks. So every aircraft we got on in Central Asia took off after dark and landed before dawn. So I'd had a peek at the USSR before it stopped being the USSR. So the first problem is, I don't doubt now that there's going to be some guy named, Pavel, who will be more than happy to, Pavel's, missile silo tour, come inside. The thing is, what I expect for them is that they've done nothing to clean up the spilled rocket fuel that's all over the place, and it's a toxic soup, So if you go in, you're breathing in things that are going to give you cancer tomorrow.
It builds character.
Yeah, exactly. Toughens you up, like good Russian, And so I wouldn't want to do that. I just feel like they'd be, these terrible toxic waste dumps. And certainly the guy who owned the silo in Washington went out of his way to explain about how much the silo had been cleaned up, that they had been through several times state and federal cleanup crews to clean up some stuff. And there was a section of the silo where everything was blackened. It was this one tunnel. Everything was blackened. And the reason was before he bought it, the Park Service was using some of the fuel tanks in the silo as a fuel storage facility for their use. And apparently the silo had been broken into multiple times by people who, went down. So it's all filled with devil worship, heavy metal retard sort of graffiti all over the walls. And apparently some of these guys decided it would be funny to try and light the gasoline on fire in an enclosed underground space because that would be cool. and they blew themselves up. The walls are all scorched. The place is all blackened. The tank's ruptured. And it was a big tank. It was like a propane tank-sized tank. It wasn't, the rocket fuel tanks. It was a backup tank for some of the other generators down there. But yeah, they blew themselves up doing that. So, dumb isn't just a Russian thing, kids. Everybody's got it.
Yeah.
So that was that. If I hadn't gone to the silo, I wouldn't have learned about the awesome thing about the escape hatch, which is there's an escape hatch. And there's a lever to open the escape hatch on the wall, but it's like 10 feet away from the escape hatch because when you open it, the tunnel to the surface is filled with gravel. It's like this 3-story tunnel filled with gravel so that you can't open the escape hatch on the surface and sneak in.
Oh, I gotcha.
Nice.
So the escape hatch is in the ceiling, and the hatch opens like a trap door, and 3 stories worth of gravel pours out and makes a pile. Oddly enough, a pile so now you can reach the escape hatch easily. There's no ladder that comes down. I mean, the ladder's up the tube. But it makes this pile, and you scramble up that to get out. And I'm like, I think I put it in the final version, something about any players who managed to sucker a child of the Wendigo to stand under the escape hatch so they can pull
Death
the
trap.
lever.
Nice.
They get an extra experience point.
I got you. So, I mean, just seeing this, you can see that, there's obviously a lot of different ways you can do researching for a game, and
thank God for the internet.
Yeah, thank God for the internet. That is kind of a godsend for research for these kind of games. But I mean, that's not the only approach. So Tom wrote another scenario that has been on the podcast called Divine Fire. He also did Bell Island, which are both historical games set in the World War II era. I know, Scott, you're familiar with Divine Fire since you've run an adaptation of it for the modern age. Tom, what kind of things did you do for researching and preparing for? I mean, where did the idea come for Divine Fire?
Well, actually, it came from the first time was I had just finished watching In the Mouth of Madness.
Okay.
And I really liked.
That's a good start.
Yeah. Well, and I love just the horrible mutated monsters in that were once people. That really appealed to me.
Right.
So I thought, I'm gonna.
Your damn body horror.
I know. I have a problem. I have a serious problem. But so I thought I want to do a game with that. But of course it was like finding the right way to do it, because there's so many different ways it could be done.
Right.
And I like the idea of making it. I kind of then thought of the idea of making it like a cancer form of a certain kind of radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it just that kind of formed into the idea of a Nazi nuclear reactor that produces radiation that doesn't do anything as lovely as kill you.
You're not going to be that lucky.
No, you're not. And so, once I got that done, then I had to think about, all right, where would they, how would they be doing it? And I was going to go with, they were doing it to exclusively to maybe create biological weapons they could throw at the Allies.
Okay, so for Divine Fire, I should mention the concept of the scenario is that there are multiple versions, but the final one was...
We're talking like we just presume everybody's read our stuff because we're so awesome. We don't have to explain to you what the scenario is.
My ego demands that, yes.
Fair enough. But for those unfortunate souls who have not listened to Divine Fire, the idea is that there is a Nazi science camp in the middle of nowhere, up on the mountain somewhere. You'll have to fill in the details, Tom. Where they're basically making an Azathoth-powered nuclear weapon or nuclear reactor, and the players are soldiers or prison laborers, concentration camp laborers who are sent there to be, fodder for the program. And but of course, by the time they get there, the place has basically been. It is broken down. It is most of the people are dead or insane, and the characters have.
It's pulled an umbrella.
Yeah,
it's pulled an umbrella corporation.
Yeah, it's a very Resident Evil kind of setup, and they have to survive. Of course, there's a snowstorm. They can't just walk away. And there's
which is very important when you're designing a scenario, because there's always going to be that one player who takes the very rational approach of going, fuck it, we're going.
Yeah, motivation is very important.
Yes,
if you give most players will take, water rolls downhill. Like they'll take the path of least resistance, unless they have a compelling reason not to. So you need to. So that is a good point. So they're there, and it's kind of a sandbox thing. The players can go wherever they want within the confines of the camp, and try and figure out what they want to do. And so so continue on.
So, deciding that, it was like this would have been something they stumbled across by accident. It's something later I had that they were using like physics equations found on documents that dated back to like ancient Greece.
Right.
And they said, one scientist was a Nazi scientist was convinced this was a way to produce uranium to make their own nuclear weapon.
Right. I mean, this is kind of the common mixture, kind of common trope in Lovecraftian horrors, the mixing of, hypergeometry / magic with science.
Well, speaking of John Carpenter, I'm sure every Lovecraftian fan had a little rush of pleasure when in Prince of Darkness they're finding differential equations in the book written in Aramaic.
Yeah.
And you're like, but they didn't have. No, they really didn't. And there's no response. We're like, that's Aramaic in differential equations. Okay, just turn around and leave the room. I can't.
And then there's the great line later on in Prince of Darkness. Also, was like, even your god plutonium won't save you.
Yes, not the god plutonium will not save you.
Yeah. Like Prince of Darkness is a classic example, giving a little diversion of a movie with grander ideas. Like it had a grand ambition. It didn't quite live up to it, but like. I mean, it's so rare to see. I mean, I prefer movies that attempt something grand like that and kind of screw it up rather than stuff that like. They have it's formulaic. So kudos for Carpenter for that. That is one of my favorite Carpenter movies. But anyway, so you had the idea basically pulling. So were you kind of going? Did you kind of going with the sewer grate metaphor where you had a bunch of ideas and they just kind of coalesced into that, or did you start with did you feel like it was more one specific idea that you really wanted to seize on? I
started with the monster first.
Okay, the monster first, and then you built up on that.
Yeah, I built up on that and essentially decided to go with it's kind of like cancer.
Okay, so
no, I just realized that I started with the setting first. Yeah. I started with the silo, the underground, the isolated base first.
Yeah,
and then sort of built around that.
And also not just the place, but the time too, because
the
coup is obviously very important in the scenario, and. So for you, Tom, in terms of researching this, once you decided that you wanted to do it in this Nazi, science base camp, whatever you want to call it, like what did you do to research it? Like what kind of
also first, I had to choose the setting as well, and the time, and I thought it'd be best to do it like December of '44 before the Battle of the Bulge, where it's they're planning the offensives that's going to save the fatherland.
Okay, so you still want them in. So that was important in the sense that you wanted the Nazis to have it to be like, oh, this is our last chance to turn.
Yeah, which is why so I could have this. They were really trying to rush this project. I mean, normally if you had this was like the Nazis during their 40 to 41 and 42 where they were just kicking ass all over the place, there wouldn't be quite the urgency.
Or the maniacal risk taking, or banking on something that is, a pipe dream. It's like we're gonna, they have to be desperate before they start fiddling around with. We're just gonna punch a hole in this dimension.
Yeah,
it'll work out. Sure, there are risks, but we're just gonna punch a hole. In the universe.
Yeah, and the setting. I looked around at topographical maps of Germany. Like, all right, there's some mountain ranges. Which ones do I want to throw them in?
Were you using Google Maps or a real, I assume, or what?
Yeah,
what?
Google. I use Google Maps for
Of course. And that the whole like fuck it, we're gonna punch a hole in the universe. It's kind of a very Nazi thing to do. Like, yeah, it's what we want. Fuck everyone else. Like that
Yeah.
kind of.
It's along the line, and it's also even at this point, the shipping of prisoners is still going strong.
Yeah.
Because again, priorities.
Priorities, yes.
They have those guys had their priorities straight.
Yeah, so it's still even though it's desperate, but there's still plenty of ways to get prisoners from the camps. So I mean, I had to take all that into account.
Okay. All right. So you came with the idea. Aside from you just picked a good-looking mountain range, basically, some place that looks.
Yeah, I forget which one, but it was.
Yeah. You have read
that one.
All right. Not quite as precise, but I mean, I've done that too.
Sometimes a name jumps out on the map, or you see something like the Devil's Hole, and you're like, that's the name of a lake. Well, that's the lake we're using because.
Yeah, I'm sure there was something like that, but that was a while ago.
All right. So do you remember doing any other particular research?
Oh yeah. Well, First of all, I had to research all the equipment, weapons, uniforms that would be on this base.
Okay. And what'd you use for that? Like Osprey, their books, or what?
Yeah, I used some of those books. I actually have a lot of World War II hardware books.
Okay.
Imagine that. I have those.
Okay.
So you have the props covered. It's the same thing with me after playing Twilight 2000 in the 1980s. I had all the Soviet gear books all the gear porn I could possibly want for the scenario.
Yeah. I was up to my elbows in Schmeisser submachine guns, Lugers.
Okay. I mean that's kind of a thing too, is like use resources you already have. So if you have a library reflecting a particular interest, you're well to use it. Like
I'm looking over here in my room. I've got literally 5 bookshelves. 6 bookshelves of stuff that's really just research material. It's just books on history, treatises on, UFOlogy, the supernatural, archaeology, folklore, military hardware, and this stuff accrues. Like, it builds up over the years, and you build up enough of that, and again, it's that sewer grate thing. Stuff that you picked up during the course of your life is just going to accrue into story gems eventually. One hopes.
Yeah, I mean that's true. And I'll get into that a little bit when I talk a little bit. Doing research for a campaign that's currently going on RPPR right now, the Tribes of Tokyo. But Tom, was there anything else you wanted to mention about researching and preparing for Divine Fire? I know, obviously, a lot of the scenario writing came from playtest revision, which also I think applies.
Yeah,
to
like the first version, they were playing a squad of German soldiers coming to investigate why they lost contact. But in that one, everyone was started out armed and in a cohesive unit.
Yeah.
Which didn't work for me.
Right.
There's too much teamwork and shit.
Well, it's also the typical thing with military games is like, who's the officer? Is it an NPC, in which case all the players have to take orders or disobey? If it's another player, then there's that weird dynamic where if you get a dick who's the officer's like, go on, Joe, go check out that.
Go find the sniper.
Yeah. Like that could be very unfun. So if everyone's more on an equal footing, like the prisoners.
With pre-gens, with a con game and pre-gens, that really isn't so bad sometimes.
Yeah.
And certainly it can work in a survival horror style scenario. But if you it's tough. I realize everyone's tooled up, but I think when in what do you call it? Cold Dead Hand. Gee, I can't remember the name of my scenario. The players are like, yeah, you get flamethrowers and rocket-propelled grenade launchers and KPV machine guns and armored tracked vehicles, and everybody I know who's a experienced Call of Cthulhu player is reading this is like, oh, good, none of this shit's gonna work. I mean, that was their signal that none of this shit was gonna work. Is that they had all of it. They had every toy that the player characters could have ever asked for, and it was presented right at the beginning. It's like, okay, we're fucked. And
it was the same thing for Night Mall, Ross. When you pick whatever guns you want. Like, hey, can I have an M4 carbine with an M203 clipped on? Like, yeah, like great. Shit.
Yeah, that's true. But that's another sort of issue. That's kind of a metagaming thing, but that's kind of just a fun.
And the great thing is, the Nazis are so great to do that shit with.
Yeah.
Exploring things they shouldn't.
Yeah. At least with having players who are playing Nazis, you don't have to have any guilt when they're horribly, eaten by the monsters. They're crunch all you want sort of scenario.
Well, the players were German army. The guards of the base were SS.
Yeah. Well, hey, where were they in 1933 when Hitler was running for office? Did they vote for them? Did they vote for Mr. Hitler?
Yeah.
Were they actively shooting Nazis? No, then they're part of the problem. They can burn with the rest.
Fair enough. So to bring back in again talking about the research. So I ran a campaign this summer using Night's Black Agent, which is a great game. You should give it a try sometime, Scott. It's very tactical. Anyways, and the basic concept was the players were freelance espionage agents, private contractors basically who got a rye of a vampire conspiracy in Tokyo, modern day Tokyo, and they decide that they're cut off from their employer and they have to basically stop the conspiracy, or the conspiracy will find that they know too much, they have to stop them. And for me, I know the inspiration came from actually I know the genesis of this actually came from a post in the Delta Green email list. I knew I wanted to run Night's Black Agents, but I didn't want to use the default European material.
I have a file on my computer where anytime somebody poops out a interesting idea for Delta Green or just throws something out on the Delta Green mailing list, I just go ahead and slide that email over to that file and go, yep, okay, it's public domain now.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, I know what you mean. There's. I thank Gmail that I can go through the archives of Delta Green and just what was that thing? Oh, there it is. Yeah. So for me, that and I'm not going to say what the post was because I don't want RPPR fans to go on the Delta Green email list archives and spoil themselves because there's still a couple episodes left to be posted. But anyways, that specific post was a big inspiration for it. And then I'd also, at that time, when I was prepping for the campaign, I had just finished a book called Speed Tribes. And Speed Tribes is a book about Japanese subcultures and youth cultures in Tokyo during the 90s. And it specifically talks not just about it talks about the Bosozuko, which are the motorcycle street gangs that teenagers were very popular. They're actually not nearly as popular as they used to be.
That's why we see them in Akira, is because that shit was never going to go out of style.
Right. But in 2012, there's only apparently a couple thousand left. They're kind of a dying breed. But there's there's of course the otaku, the uber nerds, and then there's the party goers, the club kids. And I like that image of it, so I started incorporating. And then of course the ultra right wing nationalist fanatics. There's actually a whole chapter in Speed Tribes about this guy Ozaki who has his own little right wing political group, and they do petty crimes for money and stuff like that. But he's really hardcore and purist, and a lot of these right wing groups are just basically leg breakers for the Yakuza, and they're very corrupt in that sense that they only pose as ultra nationalist, but they'll always take jobs for money. But Ozaki, this one guy is no, we'll be pure. We're not going to deal with the Yakuza. Fuck that. We're just going to be pure, nationalists. And then he gets kicked out of his own group because he's not.
There's no money in it.
Yeah, they're just fuck it. We're just gonna do grunt work for the Yakuza because that's more profitable. It's just they're just posing as it, which I found great. So. Those were the specific examples that I drew from primarily. And then, like, in terms of research I did for the campaign, aside from reading that book and reading a lot of other, like, I've done work, I've actually, going back to the library thing, I have like 4 or 5 books on the Yakuza. So I could figure out the sort of hierarchy. Plus, I have like the series of movies called Battles of Without Honor or Humanity, which are like there's 6 films made.
We all have that piece of music.
Yeah, exactly. But this was the original. Like there were 6 movies. They're considered like the Japanese Godfather. That were made in, like the 60s or 70s. And they go over like the rise of the Hiroshima Mafia or Yakuza from like right after World War II to like the 60s. And they're just like hard to follow because there's like 12 different groups of them and they're all killing each other and allying with each other and betraying each other.
Show up 5 minutes later, they've been sliced into sushi, and
there's like a huge flow chart that comes with a box set that like tries to explain like here's who this guy is loyal to, here's this guy, this guy hates this guy, and these guys hate these guys. But I love that kind of theme for it. And so I incorporated that kind of a lot of the sleazy underworld of Tokyo.
Things catching in your drain. You had already done a scenario set in amongst the Yakuza set in U.S. occupied Japan in the 50s. Clearly, this is because you read the book. What was it, Crime Incorporated?
No, I haven't read. I actually have that on my wish list. But I'm aware of that. That's written by the Adelstein, the American reporter who stayed there for like over a year. I've read segments of it that have been posted like on Slate. But like I said, I've got like 4 or 5 books on the Mafia or Yakuza that I used as reference material. But yeah, like that's definitely one I want to read.
Hey Ross, did you have to like make sure to research stuff because you knew that there's a good portion of our group that knew nothing about Japan?
Yeah, that was the thing that I guess that's kind of one of the things that I ran into is like because I placed it in a foreign country where everyone has a foreign unfamiliar name, and I even did research on using Google Maps and Wikipedia to like what are the wards of Tokyo. Is this in Shinjuku district? Is this in Ninta or so on and so forth?
I can't recommend going there and taking a look at the place because I've done that. I had a friend who was stationed in Japan. Camp Zama and I actually went to Tokyo in the general vicinity, and that sprawl is really amazing. There's no breaks between the municipalities. You know what I mean? Have you been to Japan? Has anybody?
Yes, I've been.
Okay, so then you confirm the fact that there are no breaks. But let me throw this out. I just have to. So you went to the Ginza, right?
Yes.
Okay, and it's like 5 different Las Vegas strips crammed together.
That's
right?
a good way of looking at it.
All the light. You go from one Las Vegas, or it's like a series of Times Squares. You go from one to another. Yeah. The thing that I always remember is my grandfather telling me about how when he was in Japan in the 1920s, that road was a corduroy road.
Wow.
The street wasn't paved. It was one of those split log streets, what they call corduroy roads.
Yeah.
And the sidewalks were like the boardwalk were boardwalks. They were like, it was like Wild West, wooden boardwalks along that was the world he was in. And now and clearly we bombed it flat in 44 and 45.
Yeah, the fire bombing certainly, yeah.
And you come back and it's 6 or 7 Las Vegases smashed together. Kind of an amazing transformation. But anyways, there's my.
Well, I mean that was actually another thing because one of my concerns was actually the Speed Tribes was written in the 90s, and I wanted to make sure I didn't want to like set the game in the 90s because I wanted to have like modern gadgets and spy tech and that kind of thing. But
McAfee.
But I didn't. Yeah, and McAfee, which we actually put him in as an NPC in the campaign as a contact and weapons dealer for the players. The antivirus billionaire who was
that whack job
yes.
who murdered the guy down in was it
Belize, I think.
Police. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was their weapons guy.
God damn it.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Was he surrounded by underage girls? Because that's another one of his
Heavily armed, of course.
heavily armed underage girls.
Oh, yeah. He was doing target shooting off of the top of the skyscraper hotel in Tokyo.
Because how else would he roll? So I wanted to make sure that it was like I didn't want to like make it was like for me I know it's just a personal thing that the players wouldn't care if like I put in hordes of Bosozoku or made it like 90s subculture but is set in 2013.
Yeah, if you cribbed all your notes from Black Rain, they'd be fine.
Yeah.
God, I saw that movie.
Yep.
Man.
You made the rain black.
It's like they were wondering why you let Sato go. Michael Douglas.
Yes. But so what I did do is to go online and I actually looked up. There's a lot of Japanese like websites that talk about like, hey, I just looked up like Bosozoku in like 2013, 2012, and just read like, hey, they arrested these people here. They did this and they did that. So I like they're still around. There's just not as many of them as there were in the 90s. And I also found like nightclubs, districts, sleazy bars in Tokyo, and like I found websites that list, oh, here are the craziest places to go in Japan, in Tokyo, and like just tourist websites, and like all those like traveling guides, and they were actually really useful. Like there was like 100 unusual places to go to in Tokyo,
otherwise known as 100 unusual places to have firefights.
Pretty much. Yeah. And then like there's one district, I think it's the Harajuku, where like the bars are literally just like one room apiece, and they're in these small cramped buildings, and there's like in a 4-block area there's like 300 bars, and they're just all stacked up on each other, and they're all sleazy, and they're all yakuza fronts, and they like try to scam tourists like, oh, here, have a beer, how much is that? 5,000 yen. Pay us or we'll beat the crap out of you, like you want girl, or that kind of thing. And so that helped layer in. The only other inspiration that I knew was like I have an interest in weird architecture, and I'd long been aware of this thing called G-cans, which was this massive storm drain system set up to protect Tokyo in case of like tsunami. And so if you type in G-cans Tokyo, you come up with this. You see photos of it, and it's absolutely it's like over 100 feet tall for some of these like rooms in these chambers, and so like there was a big firefight.
It's built on a pyramid of Egypt scale.
Yeah, here I'll send you guys links so you can take a look at images of it. But it is absolutely insane, and of course I had to put. My only regret is that I could only put one firefight in there.
Well, you telling me there wasn't a motorcycle chase inside?
It was an attempted like exchange of a hostage that turned into
excellent.
Yeah. So which failed horribly, and then snipers and gunfire and rappelling, and so if you look at that link I sent you can get a sense of the look. So for me, like I think I might. I mean, I'm proud that I try to make it like authentic in the sense that it, aside from the vampires bit and the whole getting guns and like and explosives in Tokyo, like it was mostly a Tokyo that like almost exists. Like it more or less, it wasn't like massively incongruous. It wasn't like I didn't have samurai or whatever running around or anything. Totally anachronistic about that.
You did have time travel to a far future.
Well, yes, but that was part of the vampires. And
wow. I'm going to go ahead and say this makes the sewers of Constantine under Constantinople. The cisterns of Istanbul. This is very modern, very. I mean, it's meant to protect them against tsunamis and massive amounts of water. So you can actually take tours of it, but you have to be able to speak Japanese or have a translator or something, because like in case they need to give emergency instructions, they need to tell you where to go, and so you don't drown or whatever. Just you Gajin, stay here.
So for me, that was sort of like, my process for it is I had a specific spark, a source, and like I got to use this, and it sort of went from there. But in terms of researching, I drew for my own materials and just using the internet, but like not just Google Maps, but just like sort of tourist websites and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of non-obvious sources for doing research, not just like primary historical documents or professional guides like the Osprey guide.
Some of the primary historical documents have gotten are getting easier to find because they're turning up on things like there's a few things I used to research the Iron Devil that I found as documents on what's the site, Gutenberg.
Oh, yeah.
Where they reprint stuff that's out of print. Oddly enough, there's a guy named the commander of U.S. forces in Siberia when you guys played Iron Devils, a guy named Robert Graves, I believe.
Yeah. And
General Graves, after he retired from the military in the 30s, wrote a kiss and tell book that criticized U.S. policy and the U.S. expedition to Siberia. And I've been trying to find a copy of it, but it's like original copy. The last time it was reprinted was maybe in the 30s or something, and original copies were going for hundreds of dollars that I could find. However, I found a PDF of it on a site run by an American Communist Party organ. Where they had reprinted the book because it was critical of the U.S. invasion of Russia, of Bolshevik Russia in the 1919-1920 period. So they had held on to it, and they made it available. And it's a great book filled with horrifying details, something that I will definitely put in the Iron Devil. There was an incident that Graves was talking about where an American soldier is like in a train station or something, or coming back to his barracks, and a couple of white Russian officers accost him. They start calling him a Bolshevik and a Jew, and according to witnesses, and he like shoves one of the Russians, and they gun him down on the spot. They just shoot him full of holes, and they just walk away, go to a magistrate in the Russian courthouse, are tried and acquitted of murder in less than an hour.
Jeez. Nice.
And they're like, rule of law applies here, and that. So if you're wondering why they were gunning people, why the Americans sort of took to getting a little fast on the trigger when it came to the whites, it was shit like that. And these details, Graves going through sort of the, his list of gripes about the whites. Those details are golden for doing any kind of game research, because again, it's stranger than fiction. I mean, John Tynes, is the guy I referenced for the quote. When you scratch history, it bleeds weird.
Yeah.
And the more you dig on it, the weirder, the more shocking things you're going to find. I mean, what's his name? When you Baron was it von Eugen Sternberg?
Oh, Sternberg! Oh man, the crazy son of a bitch.
The bloody white Baron.
Yeah.
A German. He's like a German descended Lithuanian or Latvian Baltic Romanov royalty, which means he's probably can trace his ancestors to the Teutonic Knights, who, somehow after being hit in the head by a sword during World War I, goes a little funny in the head. And by the end of it, he has decided he is the reincarnated Genghis Khan and has taken over Mongolia and is got some Mongolian, the Baga Khan or something like that, who's the local Tibetan spiritual leader who's blind from syphilis, that he's dragging around with him, planning on a giant campaign to invade the Soviet Union and purge it of all Jews, And he's got swastikas. Yeah, there's, he took the shortcut around Hitler. This is 1922, and got his swastikas direct from the Buddhists. And it's, if I presented that, as a character, no one would buy it. It's too over the top.
Yeah.
Again, the thing about this research is that you keep coming across stuff that's, the holy shit department. That really happened. Yeah, it usually really did happen.
Like, you can't make this shit up.
Yeah, when I first learned about him in one of the Charles Stross's Atrocity Archive, I think it was the Fuller Memorandum, he's first mentioned. I had to look him up. There's a detailed article about him on Wikipedia, and I was like, oh my god, this guy is crazy.
There's a great book called The Bloody White Baron that I would recommend to anyone who's got any interest in Ergen von Sternberg, or von Ergen Sternberg, excuse me.
Yeah, The Bloody White Baron, written by James Palmer.
I want to say Palmer. John Tynes, I think, knows Palmer in that Palmer may have been somebody who submitted material to Unknown Armies back in the day.
Oh, wow.
So he's a gamer geek. He likes his research. So there, goes hand in hand.
So yeah, I mean, and I had the same kind of thing. Yeah, like you go back to Speed Tribes, like reading about the interactions between like the ultra right wing nationalists and the Yakuza was actually material for like in Night's Black Agent. Part of the game is the conspiramid, where you build a pyramid or hierarchy of like the various front organizations of the vampire conspiracy, and the players basically methodically work their way from one front organization to another. So you have these ultra right wing nationalists who have interactions with the Yakuza this way, and so the players could follow the breadcrumbs all the way back to the top, and that was those kind of like complex interactions. Like
I'm going to go ahead and say that when he said conspiramid, which I think is a hilarious term. The problem is when you read historical conspiracies, it's less conspiramid and more conspirapasta, where it's trying to.
It's true.
It doesn't never go to a point, It's just this. It's just this Gordian knot of all these guys, all with various agendas that just happen to coincide for 15 minutes, and now they're part of the conspiracy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you look at the Yakuza, like the historical flowcharts, like it makes no goddamn sense. Like there's just like 50 different families, and they have ties to each other, but they're all murdering each other, and it's just insane. But. So yeah, I mean that's a really good source. So like in general terms, like for your research methods for running games, like Tom, like what kind of things aside from referring to your own personal library and checking the internet, are there any other things you've done or like to do for a particular game?
Well, actually, the game Bell Island.
Yeah.
That whole thing came about.
The Bell Island being like a Liberty ship from World War II. Liberty ships being cheaply made, quickly made freighters.
Yeah, like the record. They finished a ship from laying the keel to having it ready to go in 71 hours.
Yeah, I want to get on board that and get in the middle of the Atlantic. That's what I want to do.
Well, yeah,
with U-boats. It's not just that there's.
They actually said they welded it, and it said on some of the ships the weldings just gave out in the cold Atlantic, and the ships literally split in two.
Oh!
Hopefully before they put people on them, like
in the middle of the Atlantic.
Oh, in the middle. Ooh, not right out of the harbor. Ouch.
Not when they dump it in the water, dump it out of the dry dock. No, you don't even need U-boats.
No.
Oh my God.
Well, the whole idea, everything came because I was watching the History Channel, and they had a special on Henry J. Kaiser, who basically built them.
Yeah.
And it's just watching, listening to this, like he would have his own shipyards compete with each other. And when I heard like a ship built like that, where they're called Kaiser's coffins. Like not only that, adding that you're in the middle of the Atlantic in U-boat infested waters, like, oh, I got to do something with this.
So for you, where did you first hear about them? Was it just like a documentary or a TV or a?
It was a documentary. Watching that documentary on Henry J. Kaiser.
Okay. Was it a History Channel show or was it like?
Yeah, it was on the History Channel.
Okay. So you saw that
back in the day when it was still the Hitler Channel and not the Ice Road Truckers Channel.
Pretty much, yeah.
Aliens.
Aliens and ghosts. God damn History Channel.
Yeah. All right. So you saw that and that sparked you. And so what happened next, or how'd you proceed next?
After that, essentially what happened to do is I had to know, okay, what do I want to put on this ship was all I had left.
Okay.
After I saw that, because that show gave me everything I needed, but what fucked up thing do I want to be on there besides being on a ship?
The supernatural element. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you try to find like schematics of the ships? Or
Yeah, I looked up, and actually, they're like the full schematics of Liberty ships are easily available.
I'm really thrilled about the amount of deck plans you can find online these days.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
everybody wants to know when you're having the fight with the monster on the the tramp steamer. They want to know where the hatches are. They want to know what the line.
Where's the deck gun?
Yeah.
Where's the deck gun?
And another thing I loved about that
it's back in Chesapeake Bay. That's where your deck gun is.
Yeah, and I love that you're merchant marines in this one. You're not combat soldiers.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
but essentially, I had the full schematics of the ship itself. All I had to do was just think of something supernatural to throw on it, and boom, that was it.
Okay. That sounds like a very easy. Yeah, I mean that's a lot of scenarios are like that. I know I've run scenarios in the past where I take a specific article or something I've read and that's it. That's the scenario. Like for example, a Wired article I read about Picker, Oklahoma, where a town is essentially there's so much lead mining and in this town there's so much mining in this town that it's basically useless or like it's a Superfund site, which means that the government's trying to clean up all the fucking wet.
The government's
waste.
trying to take care of it.
Yeah, it was a major national center of lead and zinc mining, and there's the groundwater's heavily contaminated. It's just there's all kinds of toxic mine tailings there, known as chat, heaped throughout the area. So it's just there's cave-ins. The sinkholes just literally eat buildings up and that kind of thing. They're just sinking in there, and so I saw that. I was like, oh wow, that's kind of like a post-apocalyptic thing right in the middle of the country. And so I figured
the only thing that's missing is some cage fights for scraps of food.
Well, there are a couple of residents there, but what I thought is it actually reminded me of one sort of an underrated, well, I don't know if underrated, but sort of underused story from Lovecraft, which is the Mound, which is sort of in the same geographic region. The Mound, of course, being about mound building Indians.
Don't say that one's underused. They got plans for the Mound.
I know Shane Ivey wrote an article or a scenario that utilizes the Mound, but I can't remember. Is that a spoiler alert for the upcoming Delta Green?
Well, I don't know if it'll be able to make it into the Delta Green book. It'll make it into either the Unspeakable Oath or into a follow-on book. But I've got something that crossbreeds the Mound, the movie Smila's Sense of Snow, which I recommend to anyone, and a radio show from the 1940s and 50s called Quiet Please, and the particular episode is The Thing on the Forble Board, which, again, I recommend is just one of the scariest goddamn things ever.
Thing from the what?
The Thing on the Forble Board. Quiet Please is this great horror radio program, really kind of adult. And years ago in college, I heard this radio show called The Thing on the Forble Board, and that is a reference to oil derricks. When they're put up, the roughnecks refer to the height of an oil derrick as, we know, there's that platform that runs around the derrick part way up. There's the single, the double, the treble, and the forble. That's what they call how they rate how high it is how many decks it has. So the Thing on the Forble Board is not Lovecraft, but it's got some very Lovecraftian tropes in it, and it definitely also you'll pick up the connections between it and the Mound.
Okay.
It's extremely scary stuff, and no, hearing the radio show won't help you. It was just inspiration. It's one of these things that you get stuck in your grate. And I heard it the first time in like 1996 on the radio, because the college radio station played old time radio.
Yeah. And
I'm like, okay, we're gonna sock that one away.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's you can find downloads of it online.
Oh yeah, you can listen to it, no problem.
I'll put some links on that up there. One thing, so that was the setting for it, and then I took the Mound Not as like in the mound. There's like it's sort of the Hollow Earth kind of Lovecraft's take on the Hollow Earth sort of thing. There's underground civilizations, obviously quite decadent and Cthulhu worshipping.
Oh, sure.
As they are like to do, and I put that in there. So I wanted to make it Delta Green, so I threw in the Migu, and then like excavate.
You don't have to throw the Migu in. I mean, the Migu are integral to the mound.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. They're opposed to each other. I think that was maybe I reread them out, and I think, the Migo are like maybe the mining drove out the underground people, so the Migo are coming in there to scavenge, to dig up, excavate whatever relics they can. And then I threw in one element, which was one gameplay concept. I think sometimes I come up with scenarios because of a gameplay concept. And in this one, it was the PC trader. So I had one player who was secretly a cultist, but he was Delta Green thought he was a friendly, who was going to an informant, basically. Hey, there's supernatural shit going over here. You need to send some guys to check it out. So the cultist agenda is to use Delta Green as a cat's paw to get rid of the Migu, and then swoop in and get rid of Delta Green and take all the relics. And the Migu are trying to defend
Was there an opportunity to operate heavy machinery?
There was. The players didn't use that.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see them. Maybe Ross. Yeah. None of us saw them. Those opportunities.
Yeah, well, you didn't see it in the scenario called Operate Heavy Machinery when you are surrounded by heavy machinery.
Well, yeah, we were surrounded by heavy machinery, but never an opportunity where it really seemed like it would be useful to use it.
You could have. There were many opportunities. You just lacked it.
Well, none of us saw them.
Well, let the recriminations begin.
Okay, if one person it's their fault. If no one saw it, that's your fault.
No, it's your fault. You're a terrible player. Anyways, moving on. So I think that sometimes with scenario design, I do start with a gameplay. Most of the time, it is sort of there's an idea or a setting or some sort of again, the sewer grade idea. I see something and it kind of gestalts into an idea for a scenario. But sometimes it's a gameplay concept.
I agree that there are ideas that I've tried hooking up the idea that the players will play a scenario, and then I will take those player characters away from them and bring in the investigators, and they get a different set of characters. Yeah. You have one group of players play the Norwegian base in the thing, and then the second group of players come in and play the Americans, and from the thing. And so you've got that, or John Carpenter's The Thing, to be accurate. So you've got the place that the results are that the group of players find are the results of player action, not GM fiat. And I've been trying to find a way to make that work in a game where I can have the players, if there's any clues to be left behind, it's because the players left them.
Yeah. I like that idea. I've actually had the similar idea, although it would go over 2 game systems. And I think I mentioned this to you before, but years ago. But the idea would start a scenario with in Little Fears or Monsters and Other Childish Things or New World of Darkness Innocence, where the players are all kids at an orphanage being taken care of by this religious matriarch woman, and things start out kind of she's very stern, and the players are new to the orphanage and they're just kind of sullen, but then it becomes very clear that what goes on at night is really unnatural, and the players need to escape because the matriarch is going to feed them to a monster or something horrible. They don't know what. They just need
Every once in a while she just shows up. There's a new empty bed. Last little Timmy was adopted.
Yes,
when?
Exactly.
Last night.
Yeah, exactly.
When last night?
Yeah.
But when did this happen? Last night.
Why was there a bonfire out in the woods? What?
That's not important right now.
Yeah. So the players,
you get a spanking for having been up to see the bonfire. That's what happens. It's
exactly.
Were you out of bed? Well, you said you saw the bonfire. Well, off to the woodshed. Yeah, that's
So that would be the thing. And then, so the players, if they investigate, they find out, obviously, the matriarch is part of an evil cult. One with, from Delta Green Countdown. Scott probably knows which one I'm thinking of.
eek, not those guys.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
It actually does specifically mention that they raise orphans. They run orphanages when they can. So then the players escape. Or hopefully at least one of them escapes, and then it ends with them being found by adults, and the adults turn out to be Delta Green agents. Then the switches over to Delta Green. The players find out.
I can only hope that this ends where the Delta Green agents take the kid home and train them up like Hit Girl.
That would be up to the given player logic. I would see that happening. So.
No, that would be the player logic thing. They're going to train her up like Hana or Hit Girl or one of these child engines of death that always seem to show up in fiction. Maybe they read Electra Assassin by Frank Miller and they've decided that's the route to go. That's the parenting tact they're going to take.
That's probably it. That's that's a PC origin story right there.
Yep.
So that was I've had an idea. So that was the idea for that, and I still mean to do that at some point. But it just never. There's always some other game to run. So going back to our main topic, I guess, a little diverging there. Were there any other? Do either of you guys remember researching anything unusual aside from trips to missile silos or?
How much more unusual do you want it to be? I wanted to know about an insane asylum, so I got myself committed.
That would be. I would be impressed if you went to that links for games.
Well,
I'm just not sure I could get out again.
Or if I get tax write-off for doing stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Research, I went to SeaWorld in San Diego to research possibly a deep one invasion of SeaWorld.
That's stretching it, Tom, and you would still have to actually publish it in order to counter.
Do you guys remember the horrible coral worm? And it was like Marineland or SeaWorld where they had this tank where the fish kept disappearing.
Yeah.
Was it the octopus getting out at night? And
no.
Okay.
It was this. There's a kind of undersea worm that is some sort of arthropod, and it's got legs and stuff. So it's not really a worm. It's not a it's got an exoskeleton and everything, and it's this horrible underwater sea centipede that chews in coral. Actually, will chew a hole through coral and burrow into it, and is poisonous. Where it's got a neurotoxin that results in permanent numbness, if you touch it. It's this horrible Lovecraftian creature that was living in this tank. It apparently had been they brought it in because it had burrowed into a piece of coral they put in the tank, and then it would come out and eat everything in the tank and go back and and hide again. And it kept getting bigger and bigger until eventually it couldn't hide in its normal places. And at one point they just took everything out of the tank to try and find it. And what was revealed was like a 26 inch long horrible business end full of mandibles and spines, all these fucking legs. That right there, that news story right there says, okay, yeah, there is a Call of Cthulhu story in here somewhere, where they brought something into the marine aquarium that they didn't know they brought in.
Wow.
It gets out at night and eats things and gets bigger and bigger until it's rampaging. It's rampaging through the aquarium. One of my goals in the future, speaking of history, is to try and do a collection of scenarios that's all set around classic Call of Cthulhu era entertainment. So something set in like a theater, or something set involving a radio station, or something that involves like professional sports, like boxing or something. That were the big sports back then.
Yeah.
I don't know when aquariums start turning up. You got to have the technology to handle the glass, but circuses, sideshows, things like that. A World's Fair. There was an amazing World's
Oh,
Fair
you could
up
do a whole
here.
campaign set in a World's Fair. I mean,
There was an amazing World's Fair up here in Seattle. I didn't know about it, but I was in the library of the University of Washington doing research where I was trying to get these postal route maps from the 1920s so I could, they're out of copyright, they're government documents, and I wanted to use them for the maps that we published in, let's see, not coming full circle. It was the most recent book we published, Bumps in the Night.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I wandered through the library, and boom, there's this giant full room display about this 1908 the Yukon Pacific Exposition in Seattle, and about how it was held on the grounds of the University of Washington, and the land was later donated to the University of Washington. There's only a few structures left that are from the fair that are still part of the university campus. But it's this giant thing that took place, and there was a dirigible launched there. They had a guy fly over the city in this sort of one-man, more of a blimp than anything else. There were all these amazing, weird expositions about different parts of the world, like the Cairo exposition, and it's all just completely done in this sort of like Scheherazade, what white people in America think foreign places look like.
Oh yeah.
But the two weirdest things in it, in the exhibit was the human zoos, where there was. Come see a genuine Eskimo village, where they had brought these, Inuit.
Oh yeah.
Alaska to build an Inuit village, and then there's a fence around it, and all the white people in their their straw skimmers and their bustles are wandering around looking at the Inuits behind in a cage, like something out of that Twilight Zone episode with Roddy McDowell. People, but there was also an exhibit of Filipino islanders, where we had just taken over the Philippines, right, and just fought a insurgency there, and so there was a village of Filipino islanders that was also on display, and there were these newspaper articles at the exhibit, where various editors and people were haranguing the expo about the Filipino Islander exhibit. They're not upset that brown people have been put in a cage for the entertainment of white people. That is not the problem. The problem is, unlike the Eskimos, the Filipino Islanders wander around in loincloths, and this could affect the women folk.
Oh, my God.
And there's all these editorials about, oh, my goodness, the women folk will be, they'll get the vapors, and they'll be all thither. And that no unescorted woman could attend that exhibit.
Wow.
Lest they become, engorged, shall we say. But the idea that there's a human zoo, because I'm thinking, all right, Inuit and Pacific Islanders, I figure that's where they get the two groups together. It turns out they're both Cthulhu worshippers. And they're like, hey, how you doing? Oh, you got an idol? We got an idol.
Cthulhu Conference.
Crazy kids together,
Cthulhu Con 1. So then they start recruiting the white people.
So you hear something like crazy from history, and you're like, oh yeah, I can work with this.
So does that happen a lot? Like in terms of like you find something and you just like, I know you mentioned with the Delta Green email, like you just file them away for later use. Are there a lot of ideas, that you just like bookmark, or do you do a lot of research for potential things in the future? Or
for me, when I stumble, I'm always gonna hit, click the next link. If it's something, when it's history or it's something, off the wall, and certainly, you sign up for, you end up signing up to link to guys like Ken Hite and Robin Laws on Facebook, and you're gonna get some goodies in the feed.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's going to lead to the next thing. And again, though, the Yukon Pacific Expo, I was in the library for something completely different and accidentally found this thing. You run across that little piece of weird history, you scratch at it, open that wound, And the next thing you know, the ideas will just start coming. That happens a lot. It's less like I want to know about this, unless I've had like a brush with it. Usually, I have sort of unsolicited brush with whatever it is. I can't remember when it was I sort of had that brush with the underground war in World War I, the tunneling stuff.
Oh yeah.
But the moment I realized that this shit existed, to the scale. I mean, yeah, everyone knew there were trenches, and I imagined that there were tunnels, but it was at a scale that I
and the sophistication of it. I mean, with the phone, the hearing equipment, and the tunneling, the mining done. Yeah, I was really impressed in the game, and just seeing a glimpse of it.
Take a look at Beneath Hill 60. It's an Australian film about the Messines Ridge attack, and there's some guys who've been, there's some characters you see with their like single-digit sanity who haven't been above ground in months.
Jesus,
it's like that movie Control.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Hungarian Beneath Hill 60. Hey, it looks like it's on Netflix. So
yes, it is.
So that is something to put on the list. I've actually heard of it before. I forgot.
Because you said Netflix, I have to say Scarecrow Video because I'm trying to support my local super duper.
I know I've seen you post about it on Facebook. Actually, speaking of that, Scarecrow Video. Yeah. A local, a well curated video store will be better than Netflix because then it'll have things that Netflix
it has things that Netflix doesn't have. Right now, I'm working my way through something called The Adventures of Blake and Mortimer, which is a British made like 1997 cartoon where Blake and Mortimer are like Mortimer is the Scottish physicist and Blake is the British intelligence officer, and they're doing all this daring do in this sort of highly fictionalized post-World War II Europe, where they keep running into villains who all the villains look like somebody took Stalinists and Nazis and put them in a room together, took all their clothes off, and then when they put their clothes back on, it was in the dark. So all the uniforms are like elements of commies and fascists, and they all have these sort of non-pin-downable Middle European accents, sort of a Boris Badenoff. And in the first episodes of this, they found the tomb of Akhenaten, who is King Tut's father and the guy who tried to bring monotheism to Egypt. The second episode, they had a super-powered supervillain charged with the mega wave so that he would be bulletproof and can jump off buildings and have a personal force field. The third episode, World War III. That's right, World War III just happens right in the middle of the episode.
We'll do it live.
Yeah. And by episode 4, they went to Atlantis. They actually went and did the Roswell crash, and it was really a ship from Atlantis. And they went to Atlantis, and then they blew up Atlantis by the time they're done.
Way to go, Blake and Mortimer.
And I'm like, wait a minute. The trajectory was, discovering the tomb of the pharaoh whose name was erased from history, to the super-powered supervillain, to World War III, to Atlantis. That's an upward trajectory where I'm not sure how do you top that?
Yeah, that does seem a little like, what do you do after that? Like, I mean,
but they keep trying, and so it's sort of it's definitely an amusing, and I'm not going to find that on Netflix.
Yeah,
it's in PAL format only. I can only play it on a multi-region DVD player.
Nice.
So Scarecrow Video. If you're in the Seattle area, go.
So Tom, for you, like, when you find something interesting, do you file it away or like
I have a vast store of, like, a warehouse of things I've seen, like, ooh, I should do something with that.
Okay, like anything recently that you've in that, can we get a glimpse of this storehouse? We already have the human zoo. Can you top that?
A lot
Hard act to follow.
A lot of mine is based on wars throughout history.
Yeah.
And it could be anything, like doing something with, like, the Battle of the Crater during the American Civil War.
Mm.
The Battle of the Crater. Well, why don't you
the Petersburg Mine?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the Battle of the Crater.
Well, it's basically it was during the siege of Petersburg.
Yeah.
Union soldiers tunneled underneath the Confederate fortifications, and then put like tons and tons of gunpowder and explosives underneath it, and blew like a several 100-foot wide crater. But of course, they totally opened up the lines. But instead of sending in the troops, the black troops who had been preparing to attack through this crater, they say no, we want our proper regiments to get the glory. So they sent in white troops who had never trained and got stuck in the crater and were just shot en masse.
Whoops.
So I always kind of thought, it's kind of a tunneling scenario, but you like putting tunneling under some place, putting explosives, and then blowing open something you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That does seem like a lot of potential for a scenario. Now, how would you Cthulhu? Like, what would you do? Like, what genre of game would you run using that as a basis? Like, would it? I mean, it would be like if for adding Cthulhu to it. I'm not even sure how you do that unless because it's a big thing. Because with historical scenarios, you always want that veil of you don't want what I guess the Inglorious Bastards problem, which is like you don't want to like do this meticulously researched game where everything's perfect and then you're like, no, we shot Hitler in a theater and set it on fire and that's how World War II ended.
That's where you congratulate your players and go, oh, Hitler's dead. Well, there's a quick knife fight back in Berlin, and Himmler loses, and somebody competent is in charge now, and oh wait, you've extended World War II by 5 years.
Well, that's just that's if you ran that game. Like, if a merciful GM would say they give up, but no, like
no, they completely now you got somebody who's not going to be issuing insane orders, and you've extended the war. That's your reward for killing.
Well, either
Hitler.
way, history is altered, and so like with these like the Siberia game or even the Zeppelin game, like they could have happened in history because it doesn't affect like we don't see news account of the Zeppelin plagued by invisible monsters crashing in the middle of the city, and there are hundreds of eyewitnesses.
It helped that it's set on a Zeppelin that was burned on the ground and supposedly doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I can do anything with the Zeppelin.
Yeah. So what would you do with the Battle of the Crater? That would not, unless you're doing the alternate history work, like they found ancient things at the bottom of the crater, and then like giant monsters came out of it. That's kind of easy. But sorry, Tom.
Well, no, it's it was still there after the battle was over.
Okay.
So I was thinking like the aftermath of that.
Okay.
After the battle's over.
Yeah.
Like after the battle's over. Think maybe players would be like playing the Confederates who are charged with kind of cleaning up the battlefield after that.
Oh yeah, you're the guys who've come to cart away all the bodies and get them out of the crater because it's a stinky crater full of bodies.
Yeah, and maybe you start noticing, is it just me or are there fewer bodies than when we started?
Yeah, we haven't really moved that many bodies, and yet somehow there are less corpses.
Okay,
yeah,
I can see that.
Hey, where's Charlie?
I could see that.
So or just it doesn't have to be horror, but something during the burning of the Capitol during the War of 1812.
Yeah.
That's like the closest like American apocalypse you could really get to, with Washington D.C. in flames.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of places for that. I know, like a city in chaos, a city struck by a disaster, whether man-made or natural, gives a lot of cover for any kinds of scenarios. I know, like Scott, you had that idea for a scenario where the players are Delta Green agents hunting the DeMonte clan in New Orleans during Katrina.
Yeah, well, let me assure you that the DeMonte clan was absolutely in plan stages. I had already had the idea back in like 2002.
Yeah.
And to suddenly then Katrina shows up, and I'm like, well, that changed the scenario completely.
Yeah. Hello, game changer.
Yeah. It's like, it'd be like, again, the that little problem that the guys at Game Designers Workshop had with Twilight 2000 when the Soviet Union just went poof, disappeared from the world stage. It's like, it's going to be a little tough making this Cold War apocalypse happen if we don't have any Soviets.
Slightly.
I give the guys at God, was it Black Island Studios or whoever it was who did Fallout? You know, they were smart enough way back then to switch up to the Chinese.
Yeah.
Which, you know, for their retro future apocalypse. Which there's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But there's stuff like that will overtake you. And it's one of the things that's making me sweat bullets right now trying to write the Delta Green stuff is I know that everything I'm writing is going to be wrong in 5 years. You know, or sooner. I mean, that's giving myself a lot of credit. It's going to be wrong in 2 years.
The war on terror, the national security state, is kind of much more fluid than the forces of the industrial military complex of the Cold War. I mean, we went from like the beginning to Afghanistan, and then we go into Iraq, and now we're pulling out, and now we're switching from ground forces to drone strikes. The WikiLeaks and Snowden document reveals have changed the game, and so there's a lot. And then of course, you know, now we're spying on our allies during trade summits, and now we're doing this.
Of course we are. Why wouldn't we be?
So that I can see how that would be problematic. So it's kind of hard to even generalize because
I hate to say it's why I really enjoy writing in the classic Call of Cthulhu period between World War I and World War II, because it's nailed down. It's not as slippery. I absolutely know the start date, the end date. I know where this army was. I know where it's going to be. I know where this national border is and where it's going to be. That really is that gives a certain amount of security when you're writing, and it helps to know that you can take history into account, and it won't turn it on you and bite you like current events will.
That's true. I know. I mean, for me, I like running in the modern day scenarios, but I don't. Usually, I do it from the point of view of civilians or low-level Delta Green agents or something like that. So I don't have to worry about larger policy ramifications, or I have that kind of luxury. I just like.
Oh yeah, that stuff should never be the kind of thing that players should get into, because once they're at that level, at least in Delta Green, in my humble opinion, you get up to that level where you're having lunch with Alphonse. It's too there's too many veils have been removed. You've got too many answers. We're trying to make you feel uncomfortable and adrift and at a loss for what to do and not knowing what is a moral or an immoral decision.
It turns more into XCOM at that point, and which would be a great game.
I'm not saying that's not a bad game.
Yeah, but it's a different one, not the one you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like in terms of going back to like the files, I mean, there are some games. I wish I had found out about certain material before I'd ran it. Like recently, I ran a game set in the New York subway system because I managed to visit New York in October and got to see the subway system firsthand and all the other stuff. And I wanted to, and I've always been interested in urban exploration and that kind of thing. And so I ran a game of Base Raiders set in the tunnels. Tom was in it, and the whole premise was like, you're civilians on the subway, robots attack, you have to escape, you find a supervillain base, you take superpowers to not die, and it went from there. And I'd done some research on the depths and like what kind of where the tunnels go and that kind of thing. But just after I run the game, I find this article on Gizmodo about the lost cow tunnels of New York City.
Yeah.
And
I saw that.
And I was like, you son of a bitch. That's where that supervillain base should have been, is the fucking goddamn lost cow tunnels, because that would be easy to explain. And for the people who aren't aware of that, the cow tunnels are basically, they're sort of mythical. They haven't been totally proven or disproven. And the idea is that in the 19th century, before cars had taken over the roads.
Before refrigeration,
the roads of Manhattan were being in the meatpacking district. Back when it was about meatpacking, it was like cow jams. Like they had to get so many cows into the butchers, and they blocked the roads and no one else could go by. And so their response was to build underground tunnels that they could take from the railroad. Rail yard to the butchers, and of course eventually these tunnels were lost to time, were bricked up and put away. They're listed on some schematics, and that kind of thing, and they're pretty. But that would have been the perfect. But they're obviously not in use now, so. That would be the perfect place for if you were a supervillain and you wanted to build your base under Manhattan. Hey, that's a great place to start.
Not to mention you can always throw in the recurring joke of it still smells a bit dungy.
Yeah, exactly. Petrified cow dung.
A century later, it's still a little dungy down there.
Which would cover up, the chemical stench of whatever super soldier drug.
Exactly, because them super soldiers, they're rank. We haven't quite figured out a way to get over that problem.
Smells like victory.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then another one I just read about yesterday was about the construction process for the new tomb for the Chernobyl reactor, for the Chernobyl sarcophagus, which is this it's a $2 billion project. It's taken 10 years to build this massive 300-foot arc, basically this covering to further protect the sarcophagus of the Chernobyl reactor. And the reason why it's taken so long is not because of incompetence. It's because you've been welding for 2 hours. You need to leave for the day. Like, you're done for the month. Yeah,
exactly. They can only work in these micro shifts.
Yeah, and it's very, very hard to do. It's actually, I found that on Gizmodo as well, because the guy who ran the excellent blog, Building Blog, has taken over as head editor of Gizmodo. So if you're interested in weird architectural shit, he indulges you pretty easily. So yeah. So those are some of the things that I would do. So like for me, like sarcophagus, Chernobyl reactor, for me, I'm obviously more in a base raiders.
The whole Pripyat, dead zone.
Yeah.
Is one of these places where it's the modern age, and yet there's this sort of inaccessible, you really shouldn't be there place.
Yeah.
In the middle of civilization, that's just I don't know how they guard entry or exit, because I keep seeing things about people who will drive their motorcycles through.
Yeah.
Through it because there's no traffic, so they can get up to 150 miles an hour or whatever. But it's this, it's no wonder they made a couple of horror movies set.
And games. And and one thing they have to do is they actually aren't building it on the reactor itself. They're building it a few thousand feet away from reactor 4, and then they've installed rails to just slide it into place when it's done.
Oh my God!
So that's their solution, which it's actually pretty ingenious.
Here's because again, Russia has been the leading country for fucked up shit since 1917. I mean, sure, the Germans pulled ahead in the 40s, but really the Russians always seem to overtake them.
You have Tunguska. Tunguska was what, 1908? 1908
is when it goes off, but they don't even get out there to poke it until the 20s.
Yeah.
So it's not important in an area.
Yeah, clearly nothing's gone wrong.
Well, to be fair, they're kind of distracted. They're by various things.
Well, I'm actually convinced that, and I wrote an article for the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, because they were showing Der Farbe, which is the German version of The Color.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
There's a German version of The Color Out of Space, shot in black and white. The only color in the film is when the color shows up. But it was set in Germany, and one of the nice things about it is that they are able to stretch the story out over a long period of time, because the war interrupts the story. That the character who is the observer, Amy, I can't remember Amy's last name, who is the observer of the farm that is destroyed, who sees his friends destroyed by the color. He gets drafted into the Wehrmacht, and so part of the story is, he's off to the war, and then it's 1945, and he's schlepping his way back to his farm, wearing the remnants of his, Wehrmacht uniform, and having to deal with the U.S. occupation forces, who are like, okay, let's see your identity card, check him for an SS tattoo, make sure he's, been denazified. It's really pretty good, and it's really low-key and subtle. One of my favorite bits is they show the farm in winter, and nobody says shit in the movie, but there's this giant area around the farm. There's no snow. All the snow is landed around it, but on the farm, there's no snow, because the color raises the temperature. Its presence melts it off, and they don't say anything. They just show it, and you're just like, If you don't pick it up, too damn bad. They're not going to explain it to you.
Yeah.
But it's not. But for that, I had to write an article. They wanted me to write something, and about related to that, and I suddenly realized what Tunguska was. Tunguska was not something falling to Earth. That's why there's no meteorite fragments. That's why there's no crater. Tunguska was a giant color leaving.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah.
Nice.
The area that they discovered in the 20s, that their blasted heath with all the trees knocked down, that was its launch point. And we can only hope that there's not a larger one somewhere else that's incubating in the Earth.
Like under Chicago or something.
Yeah. There's some place that it landed millennia ago, and any time now it'll be going off. And we were just lucky this one went off in the middle of Siberia, as opposed to Boston Common. But anyways, I don't know. There's my color out of space. But there's another thing I read in this article called "The Bioweaponeers" that turned up in a news magazine like the New Yorker, I think it was, and it had all this stuff about a guy named Ken Alabek, which is his anglicized name after he defected. He was the #2 guy at Biopreparat, which was the Soviet bioweapons program that was active right up until the end, right up until the fall of the Soviet Union. It was active. And, he told stories about, all these horrible viruses, Marburg, which is the gentle sister of Ebola. They got a hold of that. They weaponized it with something called they refined it to something called Marburg variant U, which stood for Ustinov, or Dr. Ustinov, who was accidentally stabbed by some of it by a lab assistant and proceeded to dissolve.
I think Marienburg, Kenneth Haidt used that as one of the vampire types in Night's Black Agent as an example.
Marburg is a hemorrhagic fever.
Yeah.
That's it gets its first mention in I can't remember the name of the book. It's one of the first books that came out about the Hot Zone. That was it. It was in the book The Hot Zone. It describes a French mining engineer in Zaire who dies of Marburg, and there's a Marburg outbreak at the hospital because everybody who treated him gets it. And it it's the slow version of Ebola. It's the gentle sister of Ebola. But the Russians made all these horrible weaponized products for bioweapons. My favorite was virus dispersal equipment designed to look like luggage so you could leave it in an airport.
Wow.
Yeah. And it would hit everyone going through the airport. And one of the things they talked about was that the Soviets had conducted open air bioweapon testing on condemned prisoners. And they had done this on an island in the Aral Sea. The name of the island, as if this wasn't fucked up enough, was Rebirth Island.
Man,
that's fucked up enough. Now, are you guys familiar with the Aral Sea?
Is that the one that's currently evaporating?
It's the one where the two big rivers that run into it, and I actually got to see those rivers when I was in Uzbekistan. The two big rivers that flow out of the Himalayas are like Mississippi-sized rivers, but the Soviets have been damming them and pouring the water into the desert to grow cotton, in nothing for so long. It cut off the water to the Aral Sea. And so it's been evaporating for years, and you got these great photographs of the Aral Sea where there are these ships, what used to be fishing ships and trawlers that are just laying on their sides.
Yeah. No, I actually set one of the games of Heroes of New Arcadia in the Ural Sea as like a big apocalyptic confrontation with the Galactus knocked off I used for the second tier of the campaign. I remember that now because I remember the players used those ruined ships as cover from the
Rebirth Island was in the Aral Sea, and it's like, well, it's totally blocked off. It can't, we don't have to worry about it. It's too far away for it was supposedly they never calculated for birds. That always made me a little nervous that birds could fly over to it. But they're like, no, it's fine. It'll be whatever. We're in Moscow. We're going to ignore the problem. But as the Aral Sea starts to evaporate, the shore is moving towards the island. And the island is getting bigger, and eventually it's going to be a peninsula. And then whatever is on Rebirth Island and has been there alone since the 70s is going to walk ashore.
Wow. Man, if you don't use it.
That went in the swipe file. I mean,
I think it's
definitely
now. Like, I think
will I ever get to Rebirth Island? God, I hope so, because
we could do a whole book of just different interpretations of what happens on Rebirth Island. Like,
I say, my guess is that Rebirth Island is where the Soviets attempted the Divine Fire experiments after they overran the German facility.
Oh yeah,
and then the whole story about open air bioweapons testing, that was just a cover to convince people they shouldn't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Soviets took it over in the second part of the game.
Yeah.
So they did the open air experiment. That's just a cover story to keep people from going to Rebirth Island and poking the Eye of Azathoth or whatever's there.
Nice.
We couldn't close the gate, so we surround it in concrete, sort of like Chernobyl.
Nice.
Let's go shake hands with Azathoth while we're there.
It'll be fine. It's fine. So before I think this on that note of finality, are there any final tips for other GMs who are researching games, like what common do's and don'ts for me, there is going back to my Tribes of Topia thing, there you can go too far if you lose your players, but on the other hand, you're running the games for your own satisfaction as well. So don't use the players as an excuse to not try to be authentic or accurate. But on the other hand, don't be so pedantic that it bogs down a game. If you can't find something, or if the players try to do something that seems logical, but for historical reason why they can't do this or blah blah blah, they're not supposed to be 100% simulationist. It's all in the service of the game. It's for your enjoyment and for the players themselves. So try and find a balance between awesomeness versus accuracy, I guess.
Then it's going to vary from group to group. We enjoyed. We were playing in the scenario in Bumps in the Night, the Unquiet Mind, where it's the Carrie meets Terry Schiavo, where it's the brain dead psychic telekinetic threat is wrecking the neighborhood. And there was a period of time in this area we wanted to communicate with her. It's like, all right, she's in a coma, but she's psychic. Maybe we can go get Scrabble letters, and since she's telekinetic, she can move them around and to communicate with us. And there was an amusing moment where we discovered, just because somebody said, let's look it up on the internet, oh, wait, they haven't invented Scrabble yet. There's no such thing as Scrabble tiles, So we're like, God damn it, go get some letter blocks. That was amusing to us, but on other groups of players, I'm not sure I would inflict that on them. If somebody said, I got a great idea, let's go get some Scrabble tiles and see if she'll move them around to communicate, or the ghost will do it, or maybe, I guess in 1925 they could have gotten a Ouija board with a planchette or something,
Yeah, that's what I would have gone. Yeah,
but something like that. I wouldn't necessarily stand in the way of a good idea, even though, oh no, it's not historically accurate,
Yeah.
And it depends on what kind of game you're playing, as far as do's and don'ts on research, I always start with the internet and end in a book. The internet is filled with all kinds of marvelous disinformation.
This is true.
And some of it's gameable. And just because it's wrong doesn't mean it's not gameable. I mean,
the Lost Cow Tunnels are still somewhat apocryphal at this point. They haven't conclusively proven them or not. Especially for my game, it's a superhero game, so they're going to be in there.
There's something from Creepypasta that's been making the rounds, the Russian sleep experiment, which I find to be almost good writing, and then it fails on a number of ways. It just completely craps out. But it's got a lot of good material in it. People have, of course, put it forward as it's 100% real. I swear, I'm on the internet. It has to be real. That doesn't mean you can't game it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it can't make for excellent gaming material. But I do have a tendency to start on the internet, on Wikipedia, and then muddle around until I can go, okay, let's go find some books on the subject too.
Yeah.
Never underestimate the power of your public library. Never underestimate the power of Project Gutenberg too. There's all kinds of good stuff that you can find for free.
One thing that I found earlier this year, I read Grimoires by Owen Davies.
What a marvelous book!
I know, right? It's a history of the book of like books of magic, like describing their sources and everything. And one of the things I know I mentioned this before,
and they're such crumb bums. All these wizards are just these crumb bums.
It's like all those new age self-help books that you see today, like and all those prosperity gospel books, are just right in the tradition of Grimoire. It's like get money, get sex, get power. Like that's all they are. They're just quick, easy get fixed. That's why they're so popular throughout the ages. But a number of these grimoires,
especially the necromancy to find buried treasure.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want
to just ask it. Ghosts will know where treasure is. Of course they will.
You need the grimoire to fight off or banish. You need to summon angels to defeat the ghosts that guard the treasure. That's why you need the grimoire. I mean.
Okay. All
right. That's sound advice. It saved my life more than once.
So, at one point, I remember Grimoires, Ben Franklin is bitching about all these peasants laborers going around digging up holes to find treasure, instead of going to work.
our grumpy founding fathers, yeah.
But what I like, the reason bringing up Project Gutenberg, it's either Gutenberg or archive.org, or I think both of them. Archive.org is, of course, companion site to Gutenberg, where they scan in public domain books and you can just find them. Like the 6th or 7th book of Moses is on there, and there are other, especially early 20th century grimoires are on these sites as PDFs, and they make great handouts or sources for handouts for Cthulhu. Like if you want someone to look at a copy of the evil book grimoire that the Wizard in the Call of Cthulhu game is using, you can get some of the nonsense symbols and text from the 6th or 7th book of Moses and change Gabriel, the angel names, into Cthulhu names, and there you go. You have an evil wizard spell. Yeah, so I think that's again another useful resource. So, so Tom, do you have any tips?
Actually, I often carry a little tiny notebook with me.
Yeah.
Because I never know when I'm going to just happen across something, some History Channel thing I'm just flipping through, or some random link.
I really should do that. That's a good idea.
But and I need to write down because I'm going to forget this in 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's definitely a good point. And if you're more tech oriented, there are programs that do that now. I know Evernotes is really popular with some people for note taking, and that syncs with all your not with your smartphone, but with your PC and everything like that. Definitely some way to take notes rapidly at any time, because you never know when you'll stumble upon something, especially if you're not at home. But yeah, that's a really good idea. So
there's things I've heard that I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but when I heard about the molasses flood in Boston in 1919.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what the fuck to do, but I want to do something.
Yeah, people died.
A lot of people died.
People are dying in a flood of molasses. For fuck's sake! How if you wrote that, no one would. It would people would say, "Well, you broke my suspension of disbelief."
This is a terrible Adam Sandler comedy. I don't like it at all. Even for his standards, that's just not funny. So that's a good point. Definitely be ready to seize on inspiration whenever it strikes. So hopefully that gave you guys, all you listeners out there, some ideas for historical research or ideas for specific games. Feel free to swipe whatever we talked about, because who knows what any of us will get to writing from our inspiration files get larger and larger.
And besides, even if you do swipe it, we'll just write it ourselves and do it.
Yeah, like I said, we should do a whole book at some point of just the same historical event, just different interpretations of it. It'd be like an exquisite corpse, like Rebirth Island. Like we could all come up with a radically different way of doing it. You know, Tom could do the Divine Fire. I'll do something Carcosa inspired, and you can do something. Well, I'm sure it'll be horrifying, whatever it is.
And together we'll take on the mob.
Yeah. Together we fight crime. All right, so with that, this episode will not have shout out. Then we'll have an episode coming up pretty soon with shout outs and for our holiday gift guide and anecdotes and that kind of thing, and some listener letters. So this is Ross Payton with Role Playing Power. This RPPR episode 95, Historical Histronics with Tom Church and Adam Scott.